No matter how hard you fight, for some eyes you'll never belong. Darius knew that from an early age. He knew every time his basketball bounced alone on an empty court, every time hard stares followed him like shadows, every time the silence weighed more than 1,000 unspoken words. But what he didn't know was that a single act of courage could turn everything upside down, that his mother's silent faith could stitch invisible miracles in the gaps of life, and that sometimes even those who reject you can be used to open doors you never imagined crossing. Darius's story is not about easy victories, it's about scars that teach you to breathe, about the pain of being invisible, and the strength to choose to be bigger than that. No one applauded when he practiced under the scorching sun, surrounded by distrustful stares. No one carried him in their arms when he bore the weight of whispers, sideways glances, broken promises. But still he kept going, and one day, in a moment of pure instinct, his courage spoke louder than any prejudice. That day changed everything, not just for him, but for everyone around him, and proved that the greatest reunions in life happen when you choose not to give up on your faith. You're about to hear a story where prejudice seemed insurmountable until it was broken by the power of compassion. A story where invisible walls crumble, not with beautiful words, but with silent actions. A story where a disbelieved boy finds, in his greatest pain, the chance to change everything. But beware. This is not a story for those who believe life is fair. It's a story for those who have already understood that true transformation hurts, cracks, wounds before it heals, and that not all redemption comes from where we expect. Sometimes, life gives you the chance to be light, right in the place where they tried to extinguish you. And the only question left is, will you have the courage to cross that bridge? Get ready to dive into a story of silent faith, invisible courage, and second chances. Because in the end, it's not about where you started, it's about how you choose to continue. And Darius chose the hardest way, but also the most beautiful, breathing deeply, silencing the pain, turning humiliation into drive, and building a path where there was once only walls. Are you ready to walk through this story with him? Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey. The ball bounced rhythmically on the floorless floor of the court, echoing alone in the hot, muggy late afternoon. Darius moved with lightness and precision, dodging imaginary opponents as beads of sweat slowly dripped down his determined face. The worn-out t-shirt clung to his skin, contrasting with the luxurious and almost sterile elegance of the exclusive neighborhood just outside of Charlotte. The boy leapt with precise jumps, launching the ball into the air and watching it sail through the net with a satisfying sound, breaking the near-sacred silence of the private space. Just a few meters away, behind the gleaming glass window of the house next to the court, attentive and disturbed eyes watched him silently. Karen Mitchell pressed her lips together with mild disgust, her porcelain cup untouched in her perfectly manicured hand. Her gaze analyzed every movement of Darius, recording each bounce of the ball like a small personal insult. His presence clearly stood out from the environment she lived in, and the woman felt a bitter unease stirring inside her that she couldn't quite name. "Mom, who is that boy?" Ethan asked with innocent curiosity, appearing next to his mother, with an expensive toy in his small hands. Karen sighed briefly, feeling her heart tighten for reasons she preferred to ignore. "No one important, dear. He's not someone you need to know," she replied curtly, slowly stepping away from the window. Ethan furrowed his brow in confusion, looking back at the court where the black boy continued his silent, solitary dance. The mother watched him once again, as if evaluating a hidden danger. Feeling a protective urge take over, she quickly turned to face her older son, carefully choosing her next words. "Ethan, listen to me carefully," she said firmly, kneeling to meet his eyes. "You and Tommy should never go near that boy, understand? I don't want to see you talking to him or playing near the court while he's there." Ethan nodded timidly, sensing the cold seriousness in his mother's words, even though he didn't fully understand why. Karen straightened up, a strange emptiness filling her as she noticed her son's confused and disappointed look. She walked slowly into the spacious kitchen, trying to push away the uncomfortable guilt that had started to gnaw at her heart. She grabbed her phone, checking messages she couldn't really read, while the distant sounds of the court still echoed, in her mind like a disconcerting melody. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, that solitary figure seemed to silently challenge everything she thought she represented. Outside, unaware of the internal conflicts within that luxurious house, Darius paused his training for a brief moment, taking a deep breath as he watched the sky slowly turn shades of pink and orange. He felt a mix of loneliness and determination in his chest, almost like a silent promise made to himself that all of this would one day make sense. He glanced briefly at the house where he knew he was being watched, but quickly refocused on them, ball in his hands, resuming his movements with renewed courage. He didn't know it, but that moment marked the quiet beginning of something that would deeply change all of their lives. Meanwhile, Ethan, still glued to the window, couldn't tear his eyes away from the strange boy, feeling a forbidden curiosity beginning to grow inside him. Something about that solitary scene touched his childish heart, making him silently question why his mother seemed so disturbed. A silent secret was beginning there, under the watchful eyes of two souls who didn't yet know they were destined to cross paths under very different circumstances. The sound of water being squeezed out of a mop mixed with the muffled murmurs of the house. Linda pressed her hand firmly across the polished marble floor, her face serene but marked with lines of effort and hope. The scent of cleaning products filled the air, reminding her of how much she needed this job. The luxurious ceiling lights cast bright shadows that danced with each of her movements, as she, with the wooden cross hanging around her neck, silently prayed between each mop stroke. Stepping into the immaculate garden of the residence, Linda gazed at the golden horizon and thought of Darius alone on that cold, perfect court. A sigh escaped her dry lips, mingling with the light breeze that swayed the perfectly pruned trees. The grandeur around her was beautiful, but full of invisible barriers, glass walls that separated lives, dreams, and hopes. Every house seemed like a showcase of unattainable success, where pain and struggle were swept under oriental rugs. With the bucket in her hands, she crossed the side yard of the house and saw, in the distance, her boy, tireless on the court, fighting against ghosts that only she knew existed. She pressed the small cross against her chest, as if faith could wrap Darius in an invisible shield. "Protect him, my God," she whispered to the sky, not expecting an answer but believing with all the silent strength that only a mother knows. It was the only promise she would never break, not giving up on him, even when the world made it seem like it already had. Inside the house, the carefree laughter of Karen's children echoed, mixed with the sound of a television playing loudly. Linda felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't envy. It was a strange longing for a life she never had, and perhaps never would. She wiped away a stubborn tear threatening to fall, took a deep breath and returned to work, with the silent dignity of someone who carries invisible scars in her heart. Finishing the cleaning, Linda stopped for a moment at the front door, gazing at the vast neighborhood in front of her. The wide streets, the gleaming houses, the perfectly aligned trees, it all seemed so distant from her reality that it almost hurt. But even here, amidst so much empty luxury, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Darius could open a door she herself had never been able to cross. With slow steps, carrying the bucket and broom, Linda left the house, crossing the immaculate sidewalk toward the common area. On the other side of the street, The basketball bounced stubbornly, defying the oppressive silence of the neighborhood. In the depth of her chest, Linda felt faith pulse stronger. It was an unequal fight, almost invisible, but it was their fight and she would never stop fighting. Karen Mitchell adjusted the strap of her designer bag over her shoulder, walking briskly toward the condominium's recreational area. The other residents, gathered around elegant tables under umbrellas, smiled in complicity. Muffled murmurs and sidelong glances became silent weapons in this scene of apparent perfection. Karen approached, lowering her voice in a confidential tone, and began complaining about certain strange elements using the court. "It's outrageous," she said, distractedly fiddling with her phone. "It's not safe to let anyone wander freely. Around here." The women nodded in agreement with subtle gestures, wrapped in plastic smiles and a false sense of security. The words floated in the hot air, dressed in good intentions but carrying a subtle poison that Darius would feel on his skin before he even understood what was happening. On the other side of the court, Darius felt the invisible weight of those gazes, as if they were chains tied to his ankles. His dribbles lost a little of their fluidity. His shots became less spontaneous. The silence around him seemed different, heavy, filled with a mute rejection. He took a deep breath, adjusted his headband, and decided to focus on what mattered. The ball, his dreams, the promise he had made to himself, never to give up. As he walked toward the basket, Darius heard a faint sound of applause. He turned discreetly and saw Ethan hidden behind a tree, timidly clapping for his last dunk. An involuntary smile threatened to appear on Darius's lips, but he held back, understanding the risk that such a simple gesture could bring to his potential young friend. From the balcony above, Karen spotted the movement and immediately called Ethan back to the house in a sharp tone. The boy ran head down, while Darius watched the scene with a tightness in his chest that he couldn't explain. There, under that sunny sky, an invisible wall was erected, not of bricks, but of fear and prejudice. And once again, he was left on the outside. Darius walked over to the bench by the court, sat down with the ball between his feet, and ran his hands over his sweaty face. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion that weighed him down. It was the silent pain of being seen as a threat, even when all he wanted to do was play. Even there, amidst the baskets and dreams, the shadow of prejudice stretched out, trying to snuff out the light he fought so hard to keep burning. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, when Ethan, unable to contain his curiosity, timidly approached the fence that surrounded the court. Darius was practicing short shots, focused, but he noticed the boy watching him with wide, admiring eyes. He pretended not to notice at first, but when the ball slipped near the fence, he took the opportunity to smile lightly, and with a nod, invited him to pass the ball back. Ethan picked up the ball, hesitated for a second, then passed it through the gaps in the fence. "You play really well," he said almost in a whisper, as if afraid the wind would carry his words to his mother's house. Darius caught the ball and shrugged, offering a shy smile. "Want to try?" The offer hung in the air between them, like a small act of silent rebellion against the world that separated them. The boy glanced back uneasy. He knew his mother would scold him severely if she found out. Still, something about the scene felt bigger than fear. Ethan crossed the short distance to the court, and Darius, without saying a word, taught him how to hold the ball. For a few precious minutes, prejudice didn't exist. There were only shy laughs, awkward attempts at making shots, and the lively sound of a budding friendship. From a high window, Karen saw the scene and froze, her hands clenched into tight fists on the kitchen counter, while the blood seemed to drain from her face. In quick steps, she rushed down to the backyard, the click of her heels against the polished stone floor echoing. "Ethan, come here now." Her voice cut through the air like a whip, making the nearby birds take flight in alarm. Ethan immediately stopped, head down, dropping the ball as if it were on fire. Darius took 2 steps back, swallowing hard, his shoulders hunched. Karen grabbed her son's arm and, without looking at Darius, yanked him back with stiff movements. "How many times have I told you not to talk to strangers?" she hissed through clenched teeth, while the boy dragged his feet, embarrassed and confused. From the opposite balcony, Linda watched the scene silently, the cleaning rag forgotten in her hands. Her heart ached, but she knew she couldn't interfere. When Darius returned head down to the court, she walked toward him with slow, firm steps. She touched his shoulder with tenderness and said in a soft but powerful voice, "Let it go, my son. Everyone has their own time. God has a plan. Trust." The faith shining in her eyes was the same that sustained the silent hope for better days, even though everything now seemed so unfair and invisible. The afternoon heat seemed to lull the entire neighborhood into sleep, and a lazy breeze swayed the white curtains on the balconies. By the pool, Tommy played with a toy car, laughing to himself, while Ethan tossed a small ball into the air, distracted. Abigail, the young and inexperienced nanny, sat on a lounge chair, scrolling through her phone, absorbed in videos and messages, letting go of the responsibility she should have been guarding. Tommy, curious and brave like any small child, moved closer to the edge of the pool, fascinated by the golden reflection of the water in the sun. He called for the nanny twice, but his tiny voice was swallowed by the light breeze and the distant laughter of other residents. Unaware of the danger, he knelt down and tried to reach for a toy floating at the water's edge. A slip, a small misstep. A sudden silence. Tommy's fragile body plunged into the deep end of the pool, disappearing beneath the gleaming surface with a discreet, almost inaudible sound. For a few eternal seconds, no one noticed. The water returned to its smooth, undisturbed state, as if nothing had happened, hiding the small body thrashing beneath it. The toy, which had once floated, spun slowly, like a silent warning ignored. Abigail glanced quickly to the side, noticing Tommy's sudden absence. Her phone slipped from her hands, hitting the ground with a dry snap. "Tommy!" she shouted, standing up dazed, her eyes wide in panic. She searched around, spinning in circles, not thinking clearly, while Ethan desperately pointed toward the pool, the words caught in his throat. In seconds, the nanny's scream shattered the silence. "Help!" Her tone was pure desperation, cutting through the false comfort that reigned over the neighborhood. Some adults began running toward the pool, but their steps seemed too slow given the urgency of the moment. Time seemed to stretch, cruel and relentless, while beneath the water each passing second stole the fragile breath from Tommy. And among all those perplexed, paralyzed adults, it was Darius who noticed first. From afar, he dropped the basketball, feeling his heart race like never before. His feet moved before his mind had time to think. The silent promise he had made to himself of courage, of faith, of never backing down in the face of pain, pulsed alive inside him. Without hesitation, without asking for permission, he ran, tearing through the space that separated him from a destiny that would change everything. Darius crossed the gate to the court in a rush, ignoring the confused shouts rising around him. He leaped over the pool fence with an agility born of necessity, his sneakers soaking in the hot pavement as he landed. The world around him seemed to be swallowed by a strange silence, where every beat of his heart sounded like a furious drum. Without hesitation, he dove into the clear water, disappearing beneath the surface like a determined shadow. The water was cold, sharp, but Darius didn't think about it. His eyes searched desperately beneath the ripples until he found the small, lifeless body sinking slowly. With a powerful stroke, he grabbed Tommy by the waist, pulling him up with all the strength he had. When he broke the surface, he gasped, loudly, bringing the boy with him. Tommy's face pale and unresponsive, a brutal contrast to the liveliness just minutes earlier. He lifted Tommy above the water and swam back with effort, driven by adrenaline and the silent promise not to fail. When he reached the edge, anxious arms stretched out to help, but it was Darius who pulled the boy onto the wet floor and knelt beside him, ignoring everything around him. He looked at the small, lifeless face and felt a lump form in his throat. "No," he whispered, immediately beginning the CPR he had learned by watching educational videos. Karen appeared, running through the crowd that had begun to gather, her face overtaken by the most primal terror she had ever felt. "My son," she cried, but froze when she saw who was trying to save him. The prejudice that had poisoned her heart for so long shattered into 1,000 pieces in the face of that raw scene, carved with both pain and hope. Every second felt like an eternity, and the only thing that mattered now was Tommy's fragile life. Darius didn't stop. He blew air carefully, pumped the small chest with just the right force, his eyes fixed on the boy as if, with his silent faith, he could bring him back. Unaware of the stares, the sharp tension in the air, the tears that began to well up on unfamiliar faces. It was him against time, it was him against fear. It was him against everything. In the depths of his chest, a whispered prayer took form, without words, without rules, just the courage of someone who believes even when everything seems lost. And it was in that moment, between one breath and the next, that something changed. A small movement, a slight gag, a faint hope began to emerge, but the outcome still hung by a thin thread between life and silence. A fragile sound broke the brutal suspense. Tommy's faint gag, followed by a hoarse, desperate cough. The small body trembled, expelling water from his mouth, while tears welled up in his half-closed eyes. A murmur of relief swept through the crowd gathered around like an invisible wave of renewed hope. Darius took a few steps back, his eyes wide with contained emotion, witnessing the silent miracle unfolding right before him. Karen fell to her knees beside her son, pulling him into her arms with an uncontrollable sob. "My baby. My God," she whispered, pressing Tommy against her chest with desperation and gratitude. She lifted her tear-filled eyes and met Darius's gaze for the first time, without barriers, without pride, without distance. Only the raw, inescapable truth. The boy she had despised had saved the most precious thing in her life. The residents, once still and distant, began to approach, some extending trembling hands, others merely watching in silence, as if the world had stopped to witness something they didn't know how to process. Abigail, the nanny, cried uncontrollably in a corner, while Ethan watched it all with wide eyes, his young heart beating erratically between guilt, fear, and admiration. Darius slowly stood up, drenched and gasping, feeling the weight of the tension, finally collapse onto his shoulders. He wasn't seeking applause, wasn't expecting recognition. His mission was simple: save a life. With his head down, he turned to leave, his wet sneakers creaking softly against the stone floor. The silence around him was heavier than any words they could say. Linda, who had rushed over as soon as she heard the commotion, saw her son in that state and felt her heart leap in her chest. Without thinking, she rushed to him, enveloping him in a tight, silent embrace, as if holding something too precious to be exposed to the world. No words were exchanged between them. Only the interrupted breaths, the human warmth and the silent promise that as long as they had each other, they could face any storm. As Darius and Linda slowly walked away, Karen remained kneeling, holding Tommy, her face washed with tears. Deep in her chest, something cracked painfully, an old scar which for the first time began to transform into something new. She still didn't know how or when, but that boy had changed something inside her, and that could no longer be ignored. Night had settled over Charlotte, bringing with it a cool breeze and a silence heavy with thoughts. Karen Mitchell, sitting alone on her porch, stared into the emptiness, the cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Her mind spun in circles, revisiting every second of the day, every choice, every word spoken and unsaid. Deep down she knew she could no longer pretend that nothing had changed. Unable to contain her restlessness, she stood up and walked to the living room shelf, where a framed photo of her family rested. She touched the frame with trembling fingers, as if seeking courage there that she had always thought she possessed. She picked up her phone, her heart pounding erratically, and dialed the number of Marcus Allen, her brother-in-law and the coach of the city's youth basketball team. Marcus, her voice came out weak, laden with something he had never heard before, regret. "I need to talk to you. It's about a boy, about Darius." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a brief but intrigued response. "Tell me everything." Karen, with tears welling up in her eyes, began to recount what had happened, every detail of the heroic act she had witnessed. Marcus listened in silence, his expression changing as he grasped the depth of what his sister-in-law was describing. When she finished, he sighed thoughtfully. "If this boy has half the courage you're telling me about, Karen, he deserves a chance." She bit her lip, overwhelmed by emotions, and whispered, "I want to help. I need to make up for what I did." Outside, the lights of the houses still shone like little solitary beacons in the dark. Karen sat back down, this time feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a faint spark of hope. It was as if a part of her, long asleep, was waking up. For the first time in a long while, she wanted to build a bridge, not erect walls. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Linda watched. Darius sleep, the wooden cross in her weathered hands. She smiled silently, unaware that fate was already beginning to move its pieces, weaving new possibilities with invisible threads of faith and transformation. Tomorrow would bring new things, and maybe, just maybe, the promise that sustained her sleepless nights was finally beginning to come true. The morning sun cast a soft light over the empty court, illuminating the fresh marks of sneakers on the floor. Darius, with the ball in his hands, practiced his shots as if the world around him didn't exist. Every movement was a silent ritual, a wordless conversation between him and his dreams. Sweat began to trickle down his forehead, but he didn't stop. The pain in his body was insignificant compared to the hope that continued to pulse strongly inside his chest. From a distance, Marcus Allen watched, arms crossed, serious expression, eyes focused on every detail. He wasn't just analyzing the technique, he was looking for courage, discipline, the hunger to win. He waited a few minutes before approaching, letting the boy show who he was, unaware that he was being evaluated. When he finally walked over, the sound of his footsteps on the concrete caught Darius's attention. "You've got talent, kid," Marcus said with a restrained but genuine smile. Darius's eyes widened, surprised, unsure if he could believe what he was hearing. "What's your name?" the coach asked. "Darius, sir," he replied, his voice steady despite his anxiety. Marcus nodded, liking his demeanor. "I heard about what you did yesterday. You saved a life, and that says a lot more about you than any point on the court." Darius lowered his gaze, embarrassed, but he felt his chest swell with something new. Pride. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "If you want, there's a spot on the youth team waiting for you, and it doesn't stop there. There's a good school with a full scholarship. If you accept, your life could change." The boy blinked as if trying to wake up from a dream too good to be real. His choked voice wouldn't come out, so he simply nodded. In another part of the neighborhood, Linda greeted Karen at the door of her modest apartment. The elegant woman looked uncomfortable but determined. "I came as to apologize," Karen said, with the raw humility of someone who knows nothing can erase the past, but something needs to be done. "And I also came to offer something that might change your son's future." Linda, with the wooden cross hanging discreetly around her neck, listened in silence, without haste, as if she already knew pain but still believed in miracles. That morning, as the sun rose high over Charlotte, new doors began to open, not out of charity nor obligation, but because of the silent courage of those who finally decided to see beyond the barriers. But deep in Darius's heart, the question still echoed in the silence. Should he trust? Should he cross that bridge knowing how cruel the world could be? The gymnasium of the private school vibrated with muffled sounds of bouncing balls and excited voices. Darius, wearing the team's new uniform for the first time, took a deep breath as he walked toward the main court. Every step echoed in his mind as a reminder of the path that had brought him here. The lonely afternoons, the sideways glances, the nights when the only answer was silence. As he crossed the court gate, he was greeted with shy waves and sincere smiles from a few teammates, including Ethan, who ran to hand him a bottle of water, his face lit up by genuine joy. That simple gesture broke the last trace of doubt that still weighed on Darius's chest. Maybe, after all, there was room for him here. Maybe it was possible, even for someone who had always been seen as invisible, to find a place where he could bloom. In the bleachers, Linda watched the scene, her hands discreetly clutching the small wooden cross. Her tear-filled eyes shone in the soft light streaming through the tall windows. She knew that this moment was more than just a game. It was a silent response to all the whispered prayers between the walls of their small apartment. A quiet reunion between faith and reality. Karen was also there, sitting a few rows up, observing silently. No makeup could hide the raw emotion she felt watching Darius integrate into this new world. She knew she couldn't change what she had done, but she could choose to act differently from that point forward. And right there, in that moment, she made a silent promise to herself to teach her children to see beyond the barriers, beyond the skin, beyond the fear. The starting whistle blew and Darius grabbed the ball firmly, looking at the hoop in front of him. Sweat dripped down his temples, but his smile was light, genuine. As he leaped and launched the ball, it felt like time slowed for a second, as if the entire universe held its breath to watch. The ball traced a perfect arc through the air and swished through the net with a clean, liberating sound. In that moment, under shy applause and admiring gazes, Darius was no longer just the stranger on the court. He was part of something bigger. He was the living proof that courage, faith, and silent hope can break through any barrier, even the most invisible, even the deepest ones. Darius's story reminds us that not all the barriers we face are visible. Sometimes the tallest walls are made of silence, fear, and gazes that choose not to see. But there is something that no rejection, no prejudice, no contempt can erase. The courage of those who decide to keep going. The silent faith of those who believe in promises that the whole world has already given up on waiting for. And the almost invisible strength of those who choose every single day not to be defined by pain. Darius didn't just cross a court, he crossed an entire system of walls and scars. And by doing so, he paved the way for others who still carry dreams on their backs and hope in their hearts. Because this is how true transformations happen, one silent choice at a time. Now, I ask you, how many times have you let fear decide for you? How many opportunities did you turn down because you thought you didn't belong? How many times did you accept being invisible, thinking it was safer than fighting to be seen? Darius could have backed down. He could have believed he wasn't enough, but he chose to trust in the promise he carried in his heart, even when the world seemed deaf to it. And maybe today is your moment too, the moment to cross over, to hold your head high, to choose faith over fear. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, turn on the bell, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because sometimes, a story can be the bridge someone has been waiting for to change their own destiny.